Hello, this is Pretty Guardian. And in today's video, I am very excited to be talking to you about 5 games that I think deserve not just a remaster, a remake. I want to see these 5 RPGs brought into the modern world with modern graphics, even if it's a stylized version, just those modern graphics, UI, gameplay elements that we have become so accustomed to in this day and age. So to start out my list, at number 5, we have The Elder Scrolls Oblivion. So when we look back at Skyrim from 2011, that game has been remastered and re-released by Bethesda a million times. And Todd Howard has basically said that he's going to keep redoing this one as long as people continue buying it. So we must be a bunch of suckers for that. But the one that I think really deserves a remake is Oblivion. Because when you go back to Oblivion, there were actually a lot of gameplay elements that were streamlined and or removed entirely. Oblivion had this great big beautiful open world, lots of interesting quests and storyline, and the mechanics were just so rich and so deep as far as your character customization and character progression. So I would really love to see that one remade with more modern graphics and more modern gameplay elements. One really exciting thing with this game is that there is a volunteer modding team that has been working within the Skyrim game engine to modify and bring Skyblivion into modern time. So they actually gave their tentative release date. We should be seeing Skyblivion, that is the game Oblivion remade with the Skyrim engine, in the year 2025. So I am very much looking forward to that and following their team because they are just doing a lot of really incredible things within that game design space. Next up on my list is the game Pokemon XY. So when this game first came out in 2013, there were a lot of people that were really not a fan of it. I think now in modern times, I'm seeing the community has kind of changed their tune a little bit. But I remember a lot of people were really mad that this game didn't feature all new Pokemon. It used a lot of older Pokemon in it, which I thought was kind of a great way to do things because we had that mashup of some new designs that were really clever and really well thought out, mixed with a lot of the classics that we've grown to love over the years. But in this Pokemon game, it takes place in a region that is inspired by France. The art design for this game had the goal of just making it a really beautiful game. And you see it reflected in the monster designs, you see it reflected in the character designs, and just the general aesthetic of this game. I thought it was a really beautiful game, a really fun one to play through. And I'm very much looking forward to the day that it gets remade. Fortunately for me, Game Freak has the habit of going through their Pokemon games, and in between mainline releases, we also tend to get a lot of remakes of their older games. This one might still be a few years out, which is okay because I think that the art style from 2013 still holds up relatively well. So I'm willing to give this one a few years and I will definitely be buying the remake when they do it. At number 3 on my list is the game Final Fantasy IX. This game originally came out in 2000 and it was made by Square. This was back a little bit before the merger with Square Enix. So in some regards, it was still a very true to form Final Fantasy game. We had turn-based combat and lots of little interesting mini games. There was a card game, jump roping game. And one of the things that I really loved about this one is that they took that fantasy element and just really went off the rails with it. We had airships, we had magic, we had full on fantasy, as opposed to a lot of the more modern games. Like when you look at Final Fantasy 15, their world could really be analogous to our world. You've got cars and gas stations and more modern technology and presentation to that one. In Final Fantasy IX, you had a very true fantasy experience. and I loved that game. They focused very much on the characters and their personal journeys that they went through, and it did have kind of an emotional storyline tied into that as well. I'm paraphrasing this poorly, but there was a leak that happened a little bit ago where some potential art from a Final Fantasy IX remake came out. So I feel fairly hopeful that this one might see a remake done here in the next couple years. And when it does, I will definitely be buying that one. At number 2 on my list is the game Legend of Dragoon. This game came out in 1999 over in Japan, and it had a US release in the year 2000. And this game was made by Japan Studios. They did a number of other projects that were really popular around those times, like Ape Escape and also the Wild Arms series. And Legend of Dragoon kind of came out in that time period where it was drawing a lot of comparisons to Final Fantasy VII, which, you know, Final Fantasy VII was a game that kind of changed the RPG industry at that point. So if Final Fantasy VII was the proof of concept, Legend of Dragoon delivered this fully actualized RPG. I thought that the characters were really interesting as far as their character designs go. It told an epic story, brought us to tons of beautiful locations, and it had fun turn-based combat with some quick time event elements kind of incorporated in there. It felt fresh in the sense that it delivered on what our expectations for turn-based combat were, and it also had some of its own little twists along the way. Unfortunately, unlike some of the other games that I've mentioned, I don't know if this one will ever get a remake, but you know, your girl's over here cheering it on anyway. Finally, at number 1 on my list is the game Radiata Stories. This one came out in 2005 on the PlayStation 2, and the developer is Tri-Ace. They also did the wonderful RPG series of Star Ocean. And in this one, it just had a beautiful anime aesthetic. It had a wonderful, sweeping, epic storyline. I feel like that there were some ways that the storyline back in that original game never got to fully deliver on some of the concepts that were brought up. And so I would love to see it get a sort of Final Fantasy VII remake treatment where they're able to kind of expand on some of those plot lines that had to either be cut or constricted just based on the format of the game at that time. One of the things that made this game really incredible is that it had 175 playable characters. These were NPCs throughout the game world that you could recruit, whether it was by doing a little task with them, or in some cases you had to fight them, and when you beat them, they'd be willing to join your party. And the game had like a day-night rotation where all of these NPCs would go about their day. Some of them were knights, mercenaries, thieves, priests. They would just be going about their business and you'd have to interact with them within the game world. And then the storyline had this sort of fairy versus human thing going on. And at the midpoint of the game, you would pick which side of this war you wanted to be on. And depending on which side you picked, you got an entirely different experience of that second half of the game. So I just thought that there were a lot of really fun concepts that were being presented here that I would love to see redone with modern capabilities. Just to run through my list one more time, we had Oblivion, Pokemon XY, Final Fantasy IX, Legend of Dragoon, and Radiata Stories. Those are the 5 RPGs that I would love to see remade. Thank you so much for watching along today. I had so much fun making this video. There is actually an entire other 5 games that I really wanted to add into this one. So if you like this video, let me know, leave a comment down below. And if it gets some good viewership, I'll hit you up with my other list, my back 5 that I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much. And until next time, this is Pretty Guardian, logging out.